I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking all about prenatals. I think all of us know that we need to take a prenatal when we are on the fertility journey. And there are a lot of prenatals on the market, and we're going to be breaking down the exact components of a prenatal, why you need these components, what many prenatals have as far as ingredients, which may be not helpful for you, and how to ensure that your prenatal has the exact ingredients that are going to help prepare your body for your baby. So excited for you to listen to today's episode. Hey, Katie, excited to have you back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Great. So today we are digging into a prenatal, making sure you're going to select the right one. And this is where, if you make sure you listen to the podcast episode we did on general supplements, and we're talking about some of the foundational supplements you need to take for fertility and how to really, choose a good supplement. And so now we're going to go deeper into the prenatal because there are a lot of prenatals out there, but not all prenatals are equal in terms of quality, nutrients, and delivery systems. So it's really important to make sure you're looking for, a science-backed, third-party tested prenatal. Anything you wanted to say there?
Yeah, it's just I think what I see a lot is people who are taking prenatals and supplements generally who they might have seen it like advertised on the TV, and certainly here in the UK there's like a really, really popular brand, which is, in all honesty, it leaves a lot to be desired. And it's not a cheap brand either, but it's the big market brand of prenatal. And when you actually sit down and look at the ingredients and you look at the additives, you're just like, this could be so much better. And so, it's really just to say that, and I always say this, is that not all supplements are created equal. So just because something is called a prenatal and you've got like 100 different prenatals on a shelf, each of those is going to be different. And so, what we do is we actually sit and analyze all of those because we're geeks, and and we look at and we look at that for you so that you don't have to kind of sit and feel completely overwhelmed about what you're actually putting into your body.
Yeah, we do all the research. So it's yeah, because it takes, 90 days for the egg to renew itself. And so you want to, at a minimum, when you're trying to conceive, start taking a prenatal, 3 months before. And then also it can help to during pregnancy as well. So anything kind of how long before and how long after.
Yeah, I mean, look, we always say it takes a year to make a baby because really minimum 3 months before, the levels of particularly some of your B vitamins, and specifically folate/folic acid, those levels are really important for actually growing a baby. And so it's and it's what we do actually prior to conception then, that can have the biggest impact. So as you say, we know that when we're thinking about the sex cells, so when we're thinking about the eggs maturing and developing, in our follicles before they're released, the time that takes, that is the time, like from the start of that happening, from it being very immature to it maturing and being released, and then possibly becoming an embryo, is then it is the part that really matters. So we want to make sure that we're really got good coverage for those basics before that. And the same, again, it's thinking about the male side being really important as well. So it takes an egg and a sperm to make a baby. And we know again that spermatogenesis, so the creation of sperm from start to the point of ejaculation, is around 3 to 4 months. So this 3 to 4 months is like a really kind of magic window in which we can be optimizing everything so that when a conception does occur, we know that we're approaching it from the healthiest possible place.
Yeah, so let's just talk about and we talked about some of this on our podcast about the foundational supplements, but let's talk about the really, and I think so many people they're starting to get it a little bit better, a little bit more, not more,
Yeah.
right? That'd be bad grammar, but doing a better job of making sure it has methylated folate rather than folic acid. But you
Yeah.
still see the standard of care that, physicians may still be recommending folic acid for the prenatal, which, does not serve someone.
Yeah, yeah. So what can happen, or the difference for anybody that doesn't know is that folic acid is essentially the synthetic form of folate. And so folate is it's one of the B vitamins, it's B9, and um, it's found across food, particularly leafy greens, and lots of different types of plant foods. But it's super duper important for actually making a baby, and for actual DNA transcription. So for that encoding of the fetus to actually happen, and also for that fetus to then develop properly in terms of particularly the spinal cord. So it's what so it's great that that there is this awareness around the importance of folate and its influence, but lots of the research, because of course when we're looking at medical trials, we're looking at things in medicinal form, and so a medicine, a typical allopathic medicine would be a synthetic form. So the research trials were always looking at folic acid as a supplement, and so what those research trials found was that that could have a massive positive impact on fetal development. But what we're now realizing is that there's a big difference between the synthetic form of folic acid and the folate, particularly methylated folate, because what happens with essentially what needs to happen biologically in what we call the folate cycle is, if we think about synthetic folate as coming into the body up here, it then has to go down this whole multi-stage process to then equal methylated folate, which is the usable form of folate. And lots of people have got so there's different enzymes that have to happen for that process to take place, and lots of people have got genetic variants at different stages of that enzymatic process, which impede their ability to actually convert. And so what we now are doing is trying to include methylated folate, because we know that so many people have got these genetic variants where they have issues. And so it makes that does make a huge difference. Now there are lots of case studies coming out around the efficacy of that, which is great. What I would really love to see is more some more high quality research specifically looking at the differences between folate and folic acid, because I think this is one of the areas where the kind of the we need to catch up on ourselves a bit, essentially.
Like that 20-year lag. We all know
Yeah,
it's only 20 years later it
precisely.
comes out. And then so we see a lot of foods that can be fortified with folic acid. We're like, oh, look at that, So how does that impact so say we do have a genetic variant or SNP, and we find out that we're either you're heterozygous or homozygous. You can just explain what that is actually for someone who has the MTHFR gene mutation, which I have that. And 60% of, I guess, or over 50% of us have one of these gene mutations. So you really want to make sure that you are taking, methylfolate. But if you could just explain that, and then really the folic acid enriched in foods.
Yeah, so all it means in genetic terms, which is something that at Fab Fertile we screen for specifically some of these genes, so that we can get a better understanding of the individual piece. All it means, if you are homozygous versus heterozygous, for specifically around the MTHFR SNP, which I think is the most infamous one, and the one that loads of people freak out about, is that there is a down regulation of the expression of that gene, which means that the enzymatic process that has to happen in order to make that conversion to methylated folate is impeded. And if you are homozygous, then it means that you have got two genetic variants, because we have two sets of two alleles. We have a gene from our mum and a gene from our dad. And so if you're homozygous, homo means same, and so it means that you've got two genetic variants sitting on that gene. If you're heterozygous, then it means that you've got one genetic variant and one presenting as normal. And so all that means is that if you're homozygous, then it's something that you probably need to pay more attention to, because the likelihood is that enzymatic process is going to be even slower.
And then, we include genetic testing. It's different from the testing that you would have done if you're at the fertility clinic. So we're looking at thyroid, MTHFR, glucose, your FSH, and way more on this female hormone panel that we're doing as part of our Fab Fertile method. But from if you're picking your prenatal, make sure it has methylfolate. And then if we are seeing foods enriched with folic acid, what should we do?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one, isn't it, Sarah? Because the fortification of foods it's I think, for the most part, a well-meaning public health drive. But a lot of the time, it just goes a little bit wonky. And ultimately, the sad thing about the need to enrich and fortify foods with folic acid, mainly like cereals and those kind of foods, which I always bang my head against a brick wall about. I hate cereal. But those kind of foods are often fortified, and the reason for that, ultimately, or the sad thing about that, is because most of us are not including enough whole plant foods in our diet today. And by whole plant foods, I'm not talking about cereals. I'm talking about fruit and vegetables, and particularly dark green leafy vegetables, and even foods like pulses and legumes, and those kind of foods are rich in folate naturally as well. So essentially, in the modern world, we're so depleted in the amount of vegetables that we're eating, that we're having to fortify our flipping cereals with folic acid, like with a synthetic form of folic acid, when it is so widely available in the food world. All you have to do is eat real food. So it's a sad state of affairs. But if you see a food that is fortified with folic acid, please, please, please just stop and ask yourself, should I be eating this cereal that's fortified with folic acid, or could I be adding some greens to my dinner? And then thinking about a good quality prenatal as well. So that's what I think about that.
And it's got a health claim on it. Typically, you want to run the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let's talk about, there's some case studies actually. So I interviewed Dr. Ben Lynch many years ago, actually, on this podcast, and talking about, he's passionate about MTHFR, and his book Dirty Genes is amazing. So you can pick that up. But case studies about folic acid, then increasing homocysteine levels. And then also people that were struggling with infertility. One had multiple failed IVFs, and she was advised to take folic acid.
Yeah. And so this was a case study that came out recently, or a couple of case studies that were published. And absolutely right. It was a fertility specific scenario, and we do see this a lot. So often in people who have had miscarriages, and people who have had failed rounds of IVF that haven't worked, often then, again, well-meaning, people are prescribed this high dose of folic acid. So often it's 5 milligrams of folic acid. And so if we think about what has to happen then in terms of folic acid, as I described before, having to go through this chain of events to get into its usable form, if we've got issues and that folic acid is not being converted properly, and it's sitting around. We don't know this, but the hypothesis goes that we, essentially what happens in the next stage of the process, because this is all part of a pathway that we call methylation. The next stage after the folate cycle is called the methionine cycle, and that is involved in the production and the recycling of homocysteine. Now, homocysteine is one quite potent marker for inflammation. We talk about inflammation a lot as being like a big driver for modern disease, particularly risk factors for cardiovascular disease, but also causing problems for fertility and for reproductive health. So we don't want our homocysteine levels to be left unchecked. So it's quite a complex cycle and a complex chain of events that has to happen. But for me, what these case studies identify is this potential that having these high doses of synthetic folic acid, that for some people might absorb it fine, no problem at all. Other people might have an issue, and what's happening is that it's not, of course, things aren't things aren't individualized necessarily in terms of the approach of fertility clinics and these kind of things, in the same way that we might be very individualized in our approach. So, we would be thinking, well, does this person have a genome that isn't going to be suited to this approach? Most fertility clinics aren't going to be considering that. So, I just think we need to be very careful about what we're advising people to do and not do. But it's just worth considering. I just always think it's worth like getting your own genes looked at and tested, so that you're then empowered with the knowledge of how your body might cope with folic acid.
Yeah, it's a very personalized approach.
Yeah,
And so choline, making sure that's in your prenatal. I think many times people were like, we may know we eat choline. A lot of us are getting it from eggs. And then we find out that, oh my goodness, we have an intolerance to eggs. And sometimes we're more intolerant to the egg white rather than the yolk. And then we take it out, and then we're like panicking that how we're going to get our choline for to help with preconception and then with pregnancy. So what are we seeing around choline there, and making sure that's in your prenatal?
Yeah, so choline is a really important one to have included in the prenatal. And the truth is, for a lot of people, so we know that eggs are a really nice rich source of choline. They're probably the richest source of choline. An egg typically, and by the way, you mentioned egg white, egg yolk. The choline is found in the yolk of the egg. So if you do find that you've got an issue with egg whites, then you might still benefit from having the egg yolk. But it's even like an egg yolk contains around about 140 milligrams of choline, and then typically for pregnancy, the kind of the minimum intake that we want to see is around 450 milligrams a day. So you can see you'd have to eat quite a few eggs every single day in order to meet your minimum choline requirements. And so it is worth, as far as a prenatal supplement goes, and kind of making sure that you're covered for those things. Like, yes, diet is all, food first, and diet is always the best way to go. But if we know that we're covered for something like choline, which is such an essential nutrient for fetal development, then we can kind of just rest assured that it's there. The other thing to note on choline is on the genetic piece as well. So we've already spoken about genetics when it comes to folate. Within part of that really complex methylation cycle that I mentioned, there are other genetic genes that lots of people may have variants or mutations on, that can impact your choline needs as an individual, and so often we might have a look. We might be considering additional choline for people who do have issues there. But it's certainly worth including or making sure that your prenatal does have you covered for your basic choline needs.
And then if you know you have that MTHFR gene mutation, then looking at making sure that you're processing the choline would be important, right?
Yeah, and if you know that you do have the genetic SNPs, then sometimes it's a matter of looking at the type of choline. So specifically phosphatidylcholine. If you've got genetic SNPs on the PEMT gene, that can be a helpful one to consider. And that is certainly one to consider in the context of miscarriage and pregnancy loss as well.
And then the next one we have are the activated B vitamins and making sure those are in your prenatal in the right form. So let's talk about B12.
Yeah. So B12, it's again, it's one where, as with a lot of the B vitamins, it's one where people are often depleted in their vitamin B12, and lots of the uh, common, I guess, supplements might contain like really, really low doses of B12, but also B12 in forms that just like with what we described with the folate, because folate is one of the B vitamins, and B vitamins are all kind of similar constitutionally to one another in that the usable form of the B vitamins is the methylated form. So what we tend to look at is methylated B vitamins across the board, so that we know that we are then using those B vitamins in the best way that we can. The the thing One of the things to note about methylated B vitamins is that in some people, some people might have a presentation of over methylating, and so lots of people might have a presentation of under methylating, and that's what we typically see. But sometimes with people who are over methylating or who are sensitive to the methylated versions of the B vitamins, they can get presentations like anxiety or like heart palpitations when they take those methylated Bs. So it's really important, if you are taking a supplement that does contain some of those methylated B vitamins, if it's possible, start with a lower dose and then titrate the dose up to the kind of the full amount that's in that product that you're looking to take, because it just then allows your body to adapt a little bit to the methylated Bs. Whereas sometimes if you just go in full hog with all the methylated Bs, then it can, it can be take a bit of getting used to, and sometimes splitting the dose as well between, for example, breakfast and lunch can be helpful as well, so that we're not kind of putting in too much all in one go.
Yeah, we have that people, titrate up. So it's not like, oh no, you need to take this amount of supplements per day. And we take them all at once. And then, oh my God, I feel like garbage. And we don't know why. We slowly make our way up. And then I guess the form of vitamin B12, what are we looking at there?
Yeah, so typically we'd be looking at methylcobalamin, or adenosylcobalamin, or hydroxycobalamin. Yeah, and I realise these are all quite long words, but essentially what we're ideally not looking for, which is probably easier to remember, is cyanocobalamin. So if you see the cobalamin, which is the B vitamin, and you see cyano in front of it, or think cyanide, then that is essentially a synthetic form of the B vitamin, and so it's just not going to be as easily absorbed by the body.
And B6, then we're going to be taking that. And we're looking at the form then would be what are we looking at there?
So yeah, the pyridoxal 5-phosphate is, or P5P, it's abbreviated to, is again it's this absorbable form of B6. Vitamin B6 overall is again one of these really important nutrients within the context of that methylation cycle. So when we're thinking, and when I'm talking about methylation, it's really methylation is a process that happens hundreds of times in the body every second in every cell in your body, and so it's critical to human health. One of the reasons it's so important in the context of fertility and pregnancy is because it's involved in that DNA transcription. It's also involved in our metabolism of hormones, the sex hormones, particularly estrogen. So methylation is really, really important in the context of fertility. And vitamin B6 has a really important role to play within that methylation cycle. So it's B6 is really important, and one of the other reasons B6 is important is in terms of it's very calming.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of the B vitamins are involved in energy production, and so they can be like quite excitatory. And B6 is a little bit more calming, and so it's really good in the context of our brain health again, in the stress piece. So really, really important for neurotransmitter production, being healthy, and it's also
Okay, also for in the early stages of pregnancy for nausea and things like that.
yes, that's the other thing that I was going to say. Exactly that, Sarah. Thank you. So yeah, for the nausea in early pregnancy, there is some decent research out there to suggest that people who have lower levels of that B6 are more likely to have that nausea, and so it can be really, really helpful to make sure that your levels are replete, that they're kind of not depleted before you actually go into a pregnancy.
One more B for us to look at here is going to be the B2. Why is it important to have that in our prenatal and in a proper level?
Yeah, so again, I mean, look, all of the B vitamins are act synergistically together. So it's really important not to just look at one and to look at them all together, because they work together in order to have this complete whole. And so again, it's really important. I know I keep banging on about methylation, but it's really important in the context of that methylation. But also just worth noting that the vitamin B2 deficiency is really quite common across the Western world, and that is partly because of poor diet, but also because stress depletes our B vitamins. So if we think as the B vitamins as being involved in our neurotransmitter production, and we're stressed on overdrive all the time, then those stores are naturally going to deplete. And the same for the contraceptive pill, the oral contraceptive pill, that massively depletes our stores of B vitamins as well. So it's really important to, if as I say, if our levels are depleted over time, then we want to look at repleting them.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of people that have, with the low AMH and high FSH, that they've been on birth control pills for years, similar to me.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, and then stress, the chronic stress, as we see, is one of our underlying themes. I know for me, I need to have my methylated Bs. When I don't have those, I just something's off. I feel like my eyes will like dry out of their sockets. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, my eyes start to stream a little bit, and I'm like, they just feel like I got major dry eye, and I have my Bs. I don't need, not that I was taking the eye drops, but it's interesting. My whole body is falls apart. But yeah, vitamin Bs are B is essential for your health and anyone on the fertility journey.
For the health of your menstrual cycle as well, like it's really in the same way that I'm saying that the oral contraceptive pill depletes the B vitamins. Often people who have difficulties within their menstrual cycle, whether that's the absence of a period, whether it's PCOS, whether it's like really painful periods or heavy bleeds, like so many menstrual cycle issues can be, I'm not going to say they can be solved with B vitamins, but certainly supported with B vitamins.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about vitamin A. What's your take on that, and why do we need to have that in the prenatal?
Yes. So vitamin A is one that gets a bit of a bad rap when it comes to particularly pregnancy, and there's quite a lot of fear around vitamin A, and that is because there was some research that happened a while back that linked high dose vitamin A supplements in pregnancy with teratogenic effects on the fetus. So malformations, really issues with that fetal development. Of course, that is of course something to be really worried about. What isn't talked about is that vitamin A is an essential vitamin for fetal development. So where we've kind of had this piece of research and then gone running and screaming from the concept of vitamin A, and lots of people will say, I mean, certainly, lots of midwives, for example, will give the advice, you must stop, don't eat liver and all of these kind of foods in pregnancy. Vitamin A is a really important nutrient for pregnancy. So it's like anything, it needs to be balanced. We don't want to go on overdrive because, of course, like vitamin A is a fat soluble nutrient, and the fat soluble nutrients can be toxic at high loads, but it is an essential nutrient, and an essential nutrient by definition means that our body doesn't produce enough of it on its own. We need to get it externally. So it's really important to get that balance right of vitamin A. And if we think about the way that we once upon a time, in terms of our animal consumption, we would have eaten nose to tail of that animal, and that would have included the organ meats. But now we don't really eat the whole animal, and so a lot of the time those organ meats, which are the densest forms of vitamin A, are the things that we're kind of missing out. So I'm not saying go and start eating liver every single day, because that probably would be too much, but it's definitely worth thinking and making sure that you are covered for your vitamin A, and it's worth knowing as well that vitamin A. So lots of the pregnancy supplements will contain beta carotenes because they're kind of too scared about including preformed vitamin A. Beta carotene can turn into vitamin A in the body, but it's not as easily it's not as easily absorbed or converted into the active form of vitamin A, and so it is worth, particularly if you know that you're unlikely to get much vitamin A in your diet, so really particularly vegetarians and even more so vegans, then you really might want to consider getting your vitamin A from supplement form.
And yeah, and it's so important for fertility, preconception health to have vitamin A then in the prenatal. And what level are we looking at? So not to get into that high dose range where people were taking vitamin A, I guess, by itself. This is in the prenatal, and what are we looking at?
Yeah, so look, I mean, what we the kind of safe tolerable level is thought to be up to about 300 milligrams per day. So if you're having something within like about 1,500 in a day, then you know that you're kind of sitting within those safe levels, but that you're getting enough.
And let's talk about iodine. Many times people have got we're deficient in iodine due to our diet, and then iodine in the thyroid piece is a huge connector. So why do we want to have iodine in our prenatal?
Yeah, so again, it's a super duper important mineral. For again, that fetal development, so thinking about that development of the brain, and that actual that formation of a baby from a collection of cells. Iodine is a really essential nutrient, and it helps in terms of like a healthy pregnancy as well. So it helps to reduce the risk of stillbirth and premature birth, and so it also in terms of the thyroid piece that you mentioned, iodine is a really, really important thyroid nutrient. And the thyroid is like it's like one of the control, it's like the kind of thermostat control center in the body. And often the pregnancy hormones, especially in the later stages of pregnancy and post-birth, can become quite unstable actually. And so it's really, important that those iodine levels are sufficient. Again, it is one of those nutrients that is widely deficient in the Western world, and part of that is because we eat nowhere near as much seafood as we might have once done. And iodine is most prolifically found in things that come from the sea, because it's a type of iodine is essentially it's a mineral that is abundantly rich in the sea. So it's important that prenatals do contain iodine, but it's also it's also really important to bear in mind that if you've got autoimmunity of the thyroid, so Hashimoto's thyroiditis, that we just need to be really careful about the levels of iodine that you're actually supplementing with. So this is where it can become that bit more nuanced and individualized. So it's just about making sure that you're essentially working with a practitioner, talking to a doctor, talking to people that know what they're doing, to make sure that you are getting the right levels of iodine for you. Interestingly, something that I found is in people, so often we're really cautious about supplementing with iodine in people who have Hashimoto's, because it's we know that iodine can feed into those antibodies and trigger an antibody attack, so we do need to be cautious. But what I find with a lot of people is that when I test the urine iodine for that person, actually so many people's urine iodine levels are on the floor, like really, really low. So it's worth remembering that it is a really important nutrient for pregnancy, and particularly if you're trying to conceive and you know that you've got maybe thyroid issues or that you've got suboptimal thyroid issues, iodine might be one of those nutrients that you want to be considering. But
So I guess the final word on this: if someone does have Hashimoto's, and they know that, and now there's iodine in the prenatal, and it's in a very small amount, so 75 to 100 micrograms. And there's most prenatals on the market, the dosage is higher. But just kind of going back to what you were saying, when you do test the urine levels, you find the majority of people with hashies that actually their iodine is quite low. So can you just kind of reiterate that for us, if someone, just because we see so many people, right, with the low AMH and high FSH that actually have hashies. And so this is a piece that's key.
Yeah. So I think it's ultimately, it always comes back to the balance piece. And I think what can happen is when we hear something, just like with the vitamin A example, and this vitamin A supplementation will have a teratogenic effect on your fetus, everyone ran from the hills and got terrified of vitamin A. But vitamin A is really important for pregnancy. And then it's the same thing for iodine with Hashimoto's, right? And so there's, yes, we do need to be cautious about iodine for Hashimoto's, because we don't want that iodine to trigger. But ultimately, I think what it's really about is, if you know that you've got Hashimoto's and that you're struggling with your fertility, or you're trying to get pregnant, or you are pregnant and you're worried about the impact of it on your pregnancy, it's about working closely with a practitioner, because I don't think you should be going it alone, frankly, if that's the case, because it is complicated and it's not great to take stabs in the dark about it. And so these are all things that can be closely monitored. And so what certainly what we would be looking at, if someone does have Hashimoto's and they're trying to get pregnant, and if they do get pregnant, then we want to be testing their thyroid levels regularly, so that we can check whether their thyroid is reacting badly to antibodies. We can check the antibodies regularly. The big question is, are those antibodies at least stable? Yeah. So what we want with antibodies is we want a picture. Lots and lots of people have thyroid antibodies. Some people it's a real issue for, some people it's not so much of an issue for. So what we're wanting to do in testing is, are those thyroid antibodies stable? Yes, brilliant. We know that we're doing a good job. Are they reducing? Even better. And most importantly, what impact are those thyroid antibodies having on the thyroid itself? So is the thyroid stable? Is the TSH within good parameters? Is it functioning optimally? Are our active thyroid hormones within optimal levels? So these are all things that we can be checking in on a regular basis, and that way we're knowing whether the iodine for you might be a problematic piece, or whether you might need to be going up or down. And that's where the nuanced, individualized approach comes into things.
And we've done many deep dives on hypothyroidism, on hyperthyroidism, on Hashimoto's, on Graves on this podcast. So definitely search "Get Pregnant Naturally" for those topics, or you can go to fabfertile.com and you can search them on my site, and they're also on YouTube. So definitely, we thyroid issues are something that we see alongside people on the fertility journey. And then what do we got here for iron? Why don't we want to have an iron in our prenatal? Many prenatals on the market have iron. Why don't we want to have it?
Yeah, and iron, I think, is one of my biggest bugbears actually out there, because over here we get a load of I see this all the time on the back of buses, is this advert on the back of a bus with someone doing a big yawn. Oh, and it's like, basically it says, fatigued, you need iron. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, how you don't know that they need iron? Like, everyone's now running to the shops to buy their iron. And actually, yes, iron is a part of the puzzle, or it can be a part of the puzzle. But again, we need to actually know, because iron is one of those nutrients that it can be, again, toxic. It can be harmful and problematic in high levels. So we always just want to be super cautious when it comes to iron, and particularly iron when we're trying to conceive and during pregnancy, because if someone then becomes overloaded with iron, then that's when we get an increased risk of issues in pregnancy. That's when we get inflammation driving up, and oxidative stress, and all of these other risk factors going on in pregnancy. So it's not to say that iron is not an important nutrient. 100% it's an important nutrient, and a lot of people, their iron is really low. But again, we want to test, we want to know, what are your iron levels doing? And then again, iron is one of those ones where I mean, we did a podcast episode just talking about iron alone. Like, iron is complex, and so do go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. But iron is one of those nutrients where you want to get it right. So it's about food first, always, when it comes to iron, and B, it's about how do we then increase your body's ability to absorb the iron that it is taking in, because so much of the time, if you've got gut issues, then it's going to be linked in with your ability to absorb iron. So we always want to start there, and then if necessary, then we might think about putting a really good quality iron supplement in.
Yeah, because if you are like iron overloaded, or you've got too much iron, it can lead to fetal growth restriction, preterm delivery, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, inflammation, oxidative stress. So it's important. That's why not having it in the prenatal would be key. And then we could supplement if needed. And we potentially can look at iron patches or more. But again, it's taking that very individualized approach. And then, and what about, when we don't measure iron, what are some diagnoses that we could potentially miss?
Yeah, so a lot of the time, or not a lot of the time, but sometimes people have something like a condition like hemochromatosis, which is a genetic condition that's fairly common, and it can go missed. And so if we just blind, and what hemochromatosis is it impacts our body's ability to block iron absorption if the iron levels in the bloodstream get too high. And so the iron levels gradually over time will get higher and higher and higher in the body. So this is a reason that really actually for everybody, it's worth checking in on your own iron levels from time to time to make sure that they're not creeping up without you actually realizing it.
Yeah, so today we talked about the importance of methylfolate over folic acid. You always want a methylated folate. We talked about the B vitamins. We talked about choline. We talked about vitamin A, iodine, and then also iron. And then as part of our Fab method, we have testing. We look at stool testing. We do genetic testing. We do food sensitivity testing, also looking at your blood chemistry. We do hair tissue mineral analysis testing, so we can actually see, different nutrient deficiencies and potential heavy metal exposure. So all of this is very sort of taking a very, customized approach in that nutrient deficiency, where maybe sometimes we see this too, where you could be taking a supplement, but maybe your body's not absorbing it, or we see like a high vitamin B12 and it's like actually low. So it's like the blood chemistry is telling a different story. Anything you wanted to say there?
Yeah, so I think it's just to say that we it's through doing the lab testing and then layering that up with clinical symptoms, with case history and presentation. Those are all the things that give us the snippets of information that allow us to be super tailored to you as an individual. And what we don't do is say, oh, hey, you've got all of this stuff going on, we'll just, we'll supplement for this, we'll supplement for that. Yes, we do use supplements, but it's always wondering, like, why? That is the question that we're always asking. Like, what are the underlying drivers here for you as an individual? And then we're working on those as well. So it's not just, it's not just saying, okay, cool. Well, you've got, if you've got a bucket that's got a hole in and you're losing sand, yes, like great, replace the sand. But until you plug the hole, then it's going to keep on draining out, right? And so yes, we are looking at replacing the sand, but we're also trying to plug the hole too. So that's the difference really between having that approach where we're really looking at the underlying drivers on an individual basis.
Absolutely. And any final thoughts here on selecting a prenatal?
Yeah, it's just really to remember that all prenatals are not created equal. That's the main message. The quality really does matter, and the type of nutrient as well. So it's there's a lot to consider, but people like us have done the work for you, so you don't need to stress about it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. It can get complicated, overwhelming, but yeah, it is. We've done the work and research and have selected a prenatal that is, has all of these things we're talking about today, and some of the things that are not in many of the prenatals, and not really benefiting you. So, thanks again, Katie.
Thank you.